The stuff you see on the left is actually what was in his brochure. So what do you think about the statements there, specifically the second one? Or excuse me, first one. If a person calls himself a child prodigy, should that cause you concern? I think so. And then the bottom one, what do you think about that one? But what is he effectively doing here? He is using some social psychological techniques to convince people to invest without doing due diligence. Okay? By saying that friends beg him to trade their money. And this is actually what's in there. He's giving what they call social proof, which is that other people have done this, and it basically infers that if you don't do it, you're stupid. Right? That's a social psychological behavior. And what we're going to go into a little bit in this case is I want you to think about how the mind works, because we're going to go into the con artist mind here, the fraudster. Okay? All right? Here's the investment philosophy. What do you think about that? Is there anything that stands out to you? Elusive, yeah. What else? Low risk, high reward. Who doesn't want a low risk, high reward investment? Yes. Okay, so now read this one. Wait, there, read that one. Now, if you had to guess which one of these two statements was bright and center front in the brochure and which one was in fine print in the very back. Yes. So he tells me I seek low risk, high reward, but yet he also tells me that you could lose substantially all your investment. Right? System one in place takes over, right? So here's what he sends to his people. He delivers the goods, right? 62.52%, and yet he returned, well, in 1994, the market was flat. Let's see if I can go to the chart. First, here's his office. Let me show you this. Now, think about this from money laundering, okay? This is the opening, the grand opening of a new space back in, I think it was 1999, 1998, something like that. So you have lobster, caviar, everything like that. You have a harpist. Is there a reason why he chose the harpist? What was that? Money, yes. Higher class, what else? What was it? Relaxation, yes, very good. Because, I mean, if I was banging out Poison or AC/DC, and my young people are looking like, who's Poison, who's AC/DC? You know? But think about it. Do you want your customers to be relaxed and calm? Or do you want them banging their heads? Right? He wanted them relaxed. Because if you're relaxed, are you more likely to give your money over? Yes. In fact, how many of you have seen the movie Halloween? Okay, it's my youngsters, a really scary movie. They did it, they showed it without that little music when Michael Myers showed up. Said it wasn't scary at all. As soon as they added the music, it became scary. Jaws. How many, when you hear that sound of Jaws, you're like, oh, where's that shark at? Right? Music does things to you, and harpist calms you down, makes you feel comfortable, makes you feel at ease, which is what he wanted. Another system one behavior. He was very good at this, right? So he also had the table here outside. If you look off to the right here, you see the Gulf. There's another picture of the buffet. That is the reception area. Why did he got $1 million to build out the space? He had the entire top floor of that building I showed you. He got $1 million from the owner of the building to build out the space. He spent an extra $1 million on this room right here. Why did he spend an extra $1 million? What was it? Looks like a living room? It's what? Shows how successful he is, right? So as he comes, as you get off the elevator and you make your left turn, this is what you see. Is that important? First impression of wealth, right? How can we charge this as money laundering? Or can we? Any ideas? We charged it. Deceitful? But is that one of the 4 prongs? We charged it as promotion. Because as promotion, he was promoting the specified unlawful activity, which was fraud. And we charged it as promotion because as you come off this elevator, you give the impression of wealth. And people who are in an investment firm are going to give their money. They want the impression of wealth. We also charged a couple things that were over $10,000 as the 1957, the spending statute. Okay? I'll show you a couple other things. That's his wife's office. She's the CFO, by the way. Okay? We'll talk more about her. Now, this conference room table here, cost him about $100,000. It's easy to spend when it's not your money, right? Okay? That's his office. You can't really see it. That big open window shows off right into the Gulf. And then this is the trading room. You notice the difference between the trading room and everything else I've shown you so far? Doesn't look as nice, does it? Now, this is a multi-million-dollar operation. At the time this opens, he is representing to people, his investors and other customers, that I am managing $450 million, okay? And this is where he's trading from, okay? Now, let me point out a few people to you. This guy right here is an investor. Guy right here is a son-in-law. Guy right here is an employee. He's a mathematician. We'll talk about him later. That is David Mobley Jr. That is another investor, okay? You're going to see a pattern real soon, okay? So 3 things come to us at the same time. We have the brochure, which I'm going to show you about. This is the investor brochure that he sent to everybody. We have an anonymous tip. And then we have the cooperation of that guy I just showed you, the mathematician. Okay? So here's the chart that was included in the investment guide. What do you think about it? Uh-huh. Some of you are saying, like, wow, I should have invested with him. But I mean, what does this chart do to you? Because you are all skeptics like me. But an ordinary average person who thinks that there is no threat in Afghanistan, what does he see? I see dollar signs, right? Okay. The thing that bothered me the most is the middle point. When I saw it, I had somebody give this to me. And I saw it, there was only 5 months where he lost money out of 78. Does that concern you? Why? Nobody's that good, right? Unless you are on the most incredible hot streak ever, right? And so I wanted to compare. At the time, some of the times the market was going really well. And so we compared it. The line on the right, the blue one, is his returns minus, this doesn't reflect the 30% commission that he's already taken versus the S&P 500. So when somebody outperforms that every year like that, Warren Buffett doesn't even do that, and he's generally considered the best investor in the world, right? If we put up a chart for Warren Buffett in there, it wouldn't reach the blue levels that David Mobley did, okay? So that caused me suspicion, right? Here's the anonymous complainant. He joins Mobley, invests with him, sends him $500,000. Within 4 or 5 months, it's up to $1.2 million. You think he knows better? He has an indication. So he's like, you know what, I'll take my money out. And what does David tell him? Well, we've got things that we're kind of hung up in right now. I can't liquidate those now without taking a loss, so I'm not going to be able to get your money back. Would that cause you concern? Yes. Why would it cause you concern? Uh-huh. So he offers you a settlement of $850. You take it? Take the money and run. But does it tell you something? What was interesting is the guy knew that this was a fraud. He sent it to me through a private investigator I knew, and I asked the PI, I said, what's his name? He didn't want to get involved. Okay, But at the same time, I get the brochure, I get this, and then we go approach Mahesh Johari. He is a mathematician by trade. He's one of the few people in the organization that is not related. So we approach him, and he tells us some interesting things. He tells us that he was at a party, this party right here that we showed pictures of, and he heard David say that $450 million is under investment. And then a few days later, the bank statement was actually routed to him by accident. And he looks at it, and it's $35 million. 450, 35 million? He takes it to David, and David says, oh, that's just one account. We've got multiple accounts. Oh, okay. But he also got a little bit of a guilty feeling because he is in charge of calculating the return every month for the investors. And for 5 months in a row, the return is basically 10.25%, 11.43, 6.89, perfectly. So normally, if you have this much money under investment and you calculate the investment percentage return, it comes out to like 12.43, 7485, and the numbers just keep going on and on. 5 months in a row, it comes out to 2 decimal points exactly. And Mahesh even said, he's like, you know, it's almost like he's figuring out what percentage he wants and then extrapolating backwards. I'm like, oh, really? Is that a clue? Yeah. So we had these 3 things here, and we started the investigation. And we started looking. That's the IRS. That's not the FBI, actually. No. We do a history of him. We learned back in 1992 that he came down to Naples. He left Toledo, Ohio to come down here. We learned after the fact that he was representing property for sale. Private property, didn't go through the realtor, he didn't have a license. But he got this one guy's farm property and sold it for like $17,000. The amount due to the farm guy was $8,000. Did he remit the money to the farm guy? No, of course not. But what was interesting, 1992 he moves to Naples. We get on the case, we start going through the bank records. In 1997 we find a check written to this guy for the full amount. So like 5 years after the fact you owe him, now you write him a check? And we found out that the guy in Ohio realized that he was the manager of this hedge fund, making a lot of money. And he says, you better pay me or I'm getting the cops to come after you. Paid him, right? And so he starts his business. He buys a house or he rents a house in Naples and he gets an office space because he's got young kids and a wife. And he says he's not able to concentrate on his investments, on his stock. So he goes and rents an office space. He's in there every day, looking at charts, looking at stocks. The business owner constantly walks by. And what does the business owner think? It's a diligent guy. He knows stuff about stocks. They start having conversations about stocks. So one month, he comes in and he says, here's $50,000, trade for me. David says, well, I can't trade if you don't have a license. Just trade for me. David says, okay. $50,000 the first month. How much does he take? For himself, by the way. Not all of it. He takes 25. He trades the other 25. He loses $5,000. Should have ended there, right? But did it? No, because what does David do? The investor comes back at the end of the month and says, how we do? What does David do? It's amazing what you can do on a word processor, and it's amazing how gullible people are, right? System 1 in full control. Beginning balance, 50,000. Investment returns, 10,000. Ending balance, 60,000. Fantastic. What does the owner do then? Here's another 50,000. David says, thank you very much. He does that for the next 6 months. And every month, David takes a good portion of that money. But what is it? And every month, the investor gets a statement saying that your money is continuing to grow at exponential levels. What does the investor do? Tells his friends, right? And before you know it, David gets profiled in local magazines. And he gets free marketing. And now people are bringing him money all the time, right? Ponzi scheme works as long as there's more money coming in. And this is a Ponzi scheme because he starts taking money from the start and he never stops. Never stops. There are very few months that he actually makes money. And when we go back and look at it in stock trading, there's very few months where he actually made money. And when he did, it wasn't much. At the end, when we came in on him, The only person that was doing any trading was his son, and his son had $1 million account, and his son was losing his butt in that account. That was the only trading that Maricopa did. Right? Yes, sir.
Would you say that these reporters were giving all this publicity weren't doing their due diligence?
They weren't doing their due diligence, but are you ready for me to shock you? Is everybody ready for a good, nice shocking? You what?
Is one of them an investor?
No. No. But this next slide will shock you. Uh-huh. Barron's Magazine rates him the #1 hedge fund in the country. Yep. That is a copy of Barron's Magazine, and you can't really read it, but the #1 is Maricopa. I think it's 1994.
How did they come up? They don't investigate that list. How did they come up with those numbers?
Well, it's because I can't see the date, but
It's all
it's self-reported.
all self-reported.
Yes. It's all self-reported, yes.
So nobody bothered to question the guy that's securities license. He didn't go to trade.
No. No, and by the way, he did not have a securities license. He couldn't get one. He had a felony. Huh? Uh-huh. Self-reporting. This is what he reported. Barron said, okay, #1. What does that do for his business? Absolutely. Right now it shoots through the roof. Barron's comes back and plays a very prominent role later. Okay? So Barron's rates him #1. And it leads to some of the integration part, right? We'll talk about the placement and the layering in just a little bit. But here comes some of the fun, the integration. You really can't tell by the front picture of this house. We drove by and grabbed this picture ourselves. It was funny. It was one of those gated communities, and they had their own security. And so every time that I had worked with the IRS, every time we'd go to the front gate, we'd just badge our way in, and then they'd follow us. Because they'd always ask us, who are you going to see? And we're like, can't tell you. So we'd have fun driving down every street there was, and these poor guys were trying to follow us, and it was fun. So we didn't get a great picture of it, but it's a multi-million-dollar house. If you go to the back, huge pool, exclusive golf course right behind it. But there were a number of investors who were scared because we live in Florida. What is the major threat to Florida? Hurricanes. And they were concerned that if a hurricane came through Naples, would we be able to trade? So they encouraged David to find an alternate trading center. Okay? If you were asked to find an alternate trading center, what kind of things would you look for?
Low risk natural disaster.
Right. Stay away from natural disasters, right? Do you think David did that? No, his alternate trading center was here. Yes. He spent $2.6, $2.7 million on this skiing chalet. That was the alternate trading center for Maricopa. Did I mention that David likes to ski? If you go out the back door there, you're right on a ski slope, and you just keep going down. And the lift is actually, you can't see it in the picture, but it's right out there. The drop-off is next to his house. So he had it made, right? He spent $600,000 on draperies. It's easy to spend when it's not your money, right? So is there a place we can charge money laundering here? Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's his wife, Gwen, the chief financial officer for Maricopa Corporation. She's got an associate's degree in accounting. But she's yet managing an office that allegedly makes $450 or works with $450 million, right? And that's Brother Bill. He's one of their chief administrative officers, right? What do you think about the second bullet point there? These are all things that are in the brochure, by the way. Transportation industry. What do you think? Trash. Yeah, he said, trash truck. What he did was, he didn't lie, but yet he certainly didn't tell the truth, did he? And you're going to see a pattern of that. Here's David's son. Would you invest your money with this kid? Right? No. He gained experience on the Chicago Board of Trade floor. What did he do? Sweeping. Close. He grabbed coffee and donuts for the traders. But as you look at it and you're primed to think of a certain way, do you think like, oh, he's the lead trader, he got experience on the Chicago Board of Trade floor? Do you assume that means he traded? But in reality, he got coffee and donuts. He didn't have a license, right? But these are the ways he tricked him. Now, again, we'll talk about these. This is a guy named Brian Arnett, not related, and we'll focus on him and the girl in the white here. Her name is Courtney Hansen. Courtney actually became like somewhat of a TV star. She had some racing show or something on one of the cable channels. What was interesting about Brian and Courtney was they came from wealthy families. And who do wealthy families hang out with? Other wealthy families, right? So what happened is Brian was family was from Kentucky. They were into horses. His dad was a dentist. Brian would call up to dad's friends and family friends and say, hey, I'm working for Maricopa Investment. Would you like to invest your money? And to them, it's like, oh, it's Brian. I know Brian for years. I trust him. Here you go, Brian. There you go. Courtney, same way. The other people here that are interesting are the one on the far left here is Lori Welty. The one on the far right here you've already met. That's David Radosky. That's the son-in-law. And Lori is the cousin of David's wife. See a pattern? Why do we have family involved? There is, and we'll come to immunity of court in a little bit later with the wife. It's only for the wife. Yeah. Yeah, I can compel anybody to testify except for a wife against the husband or a husband against the wife. Ex-wife, ex-husband.
They're trapped. Their whole life crumbles.
They're trapped. And she says their whole life crumbles if something happens. That is what we referred to earlier today as motivated blindness. Okay? There are a number of people who know about things that are going on at their workplace that are illegal. But if I were to disclose them, I would lose my job. I would lose my income. So I have a motivation not to do so. Here, they were getting paid way more than what they could. Plus, they also had the family bond. If I tell, Lori was one of the accountants, if I tell the authorities about what's happening here, says, not only do I lose my job, but I lose my sister or my cousin, right? The son-in-law says, I would be telling on my wife's father. So it becomes close-knit, right? And when you see these fraudulent organizations, many of them start out as closely held, family-held organizations that grow. Those are the ones that usually commit fraud, okay? And so David, he does try, he knows he's in a hole. In fact, we did the search warrant. We found a sheet of paper where he had done some calculations. He had the investment deficit that he promised investors, but clearly didn't have the money. And he said, if this comes through, if this comes through, if this comes through, then I can repay the investors and have $700 million for myself. True. It wasn't just enough to pay the investors. I also need enough to make me happy. Now, I would argue that David would never repay the investors no matter how much money came in. He could have hit the lottery and won it, but he would have kept it all. He bought this company called Attitude Network for $6 million. A year after he bought the company, this is in the internet boom. A year after he bought the company, he sells it to theglobe.com, if you remember that one. And he sells it for shares. No cash, shares. Shares of the Globe were trading at $12 a share at the time. There was a caveat that he could not sell any of those shares for 6 months. Well, what happens in the 6 months? Internet collapses, boom, Globe.com shares are worth less than a penny. So no help there. Sports bar, good place to launder money? Yeah, except this guy here was stealing from him. Yeah. Two other things. People tend to associate with people similar to themselves. So the guy on the top here is a guy named Robert Hardy, who got convicted by the state of Florida for a corruption charge. The guy on the bottom is a guy named Van Tharp, who wrote a book called Trade Your Way to Financial Freedom. Mobley was his star pupil. So you can see he's at the opening, and if you look on the right corner there, you can see a stack of books that he's selling and autographing, right? What do you think he did when Mobley pled guilty? Because there's a 10-page foreword to this book from David Mobley. He's grabbing every book he can and ripping out those 10 pages. He put a statement out saying, like, I had no knowledge whatsoever but he was embarrassed. David also does this. Why does he bring in quasi-celebrities like this? Yes, more wealth. Credibility. Looks legitimate. There's something called the halo effect. It's why all these actors and actresses advertise for these products. You like them, and they're holding a Gatorade, their hope is that you will transfer your like of them to the product itself. So if I bring in Newt Gingrich and you like that, then you associate him with me. And it makes it, breaks down your need to do due diligence. He even got handwritten notes from Vice President Dan Quayle. And no, nothing was misspelled in the letters. Right? So you see, he's associating with wealth, and when you associate with wealth, more people come in. And he didn't have to do much marketing because the wealthy people would say, hey, I'm investing with David Mobley, and I'm making 50% on my money. What are you making? 13%. And there's something called the social comparison theory. And the easy way to look at it is, how many of you have ever had one of your neighbors buy a new car? Everybody, right? Did you notice that someone else in your neighborhood quickly went out and bought a new car? Yes, that's social comparison theory. We look at someone else, and if we feel that they are our equal, why do they have a better car than me? I'm going to go get one too. Same thing with rich people. If I'm making 50% and I'm only making 13, I got to get in and make 50%. So that's how it works. Okay? But we start working with the CFTC, and we find about the trading experience how it is nothing. Okay? But here's the thing. This is his super secret system to trading. It's called Predator. What do you think of the name? Give a certain impression? Right. And that's part of what he did. Right? Predator was his ultimate market historian, the key to his success. Do you think that people said, I want you to, before I invest, I want to see audited financial statements? You think they said that? Yeah, people did. But what did David say? Sure, I'll get them to you. But there were some, like how many of you know the company Cargill? The grain company in the Midwest? Cargill. Cargill. I got my little Midwestern twang going, so it's a little bit hard to understand me. Cargill, we heard, and we never talked to them in person, but we heard that there were people from their pension fund that were negotiating with Mobley to invest their pension fund with him. But they wanted audited financial statements. And Mobley was working hard to get audited financial statements because that would have been about 450, 500 million at least. Could he have extended his scheme from that point? Yeah. Yeah. Another Greek group was about to give him 20 million. And in fact, I'll give you, there was a tale of one lucky guy and one unlucky guy. One guy, day before FBI nails him, and before everything becomes public, he wires in $1 million to invest with Mobley. Okay, two guys wire $1 million to invest with Mobley on the same day. Next day, it all collapses. Okay, first guy, we go talk to him, and surprisingly, he wasn't that sad about it. He basically said, hey, I invest for a living. This time I lost. And what do you think I said? I did say, wow, but then I said, wait, why don't you invest with me if you don't mind losing $1 million? Right? No. But the second guy who invested $1 million, his bank made a mistake and transposed 2 of the numbers. It got kicked back. Yes. Now, the guy who put the $1 million in, his money got thrown into the pool that eventually went back to all the investors. The guy who didn't get the $1 million put in kept his $1 million. So they tried asking for the audited financial statements, and this is the excuse he gave. Accountants are smart. Is that true? Yeah. All right. Accountants are smart. If I let them come in and audit my records, they're going to be able to figure out my trading program. They're going to copy it, they're going to sell it to other people, and then it won't work. I will not be able to deliver the returns that I'm delivering right now if I let the accountants come in. What do you think about that? Can't believe they bought that. To the tune of over 500 people bought that, including 2 FBI agents. 2 FBI agents. When I first got that information that I showed you, I knew that one of my colleagues had invested with him. His father had run a successful business in Germany, retired, came to the U.S., and they had been living off that. And when he died, he gave a good chunk of money to his son. And so I started asking questions about this. And when an FBI agent asks you questions about an investment, what do you do normally? Yeah, and he asked that. And I said to him, and at this point I've been 10 years in, I said, dude, I think this is a fraud. What was his words to me? First he said, are you sure? I said, well, I don't have the evidence yet. He said, but I've been doing this long enough to know I'm pretty sure I'm going to get this. And his excuse was, yes, but what if you're wrong? I may not be able to get back in. Yes. He was afraid that he would lose out on these great big returns. Eventually I was told by my front office that I couldn't talk to him anymore about the case because that was an unfair advantage to him over others. And so I was like, all right. But we'd see each other in the hall and he'd say, hey, Bret, how's that case going? I'd be like, it's going. It's going. But he never got it. There was a day came, and you tell me if he took out his money or not. I'll get you to that point in just a second. All right, that was the excuse, and that is, again, system one thinking. You start thinking about the greed takes over. You don't think about it logically. You move your boundaries in your head to think about what I could be losing instead of what I could be saving. So David kind of learns that we're out there. There's people looking. And so he makes these purchases. Why do you think he does the first one? Any ideas? He what? Set some money aside. He had it for a specific reason. He hired one of the best defensive attorneys in New York. They cost $1.7 million. He kept $300 for himself. Right? What about the second one? He got something to walk away with. Okay. Any other ideas? Because what? Yes, they're having marital difficulties. In fact, she's got a boyfriend, he's got a girlfriend. Yes, but all of a sudden it becomes very important that you don't testify against me. So they do this. What about the third one? Bribe them. I want the witnesses to feel good about me and like me. I know that this thing's going to collapse, but hey, I took you on a Bahamas vacation. Now, the unlucky ones who didn't get to go, including my FBI agent friend, they got Waterford crystal glasses for the millennium. And so my friend used to say, he's like, yeah, I invested $700,000 and I got 2 Waterford crystal glasses. I said, that's my style of investing, right? But that's what happens. And then there is a bad moon rising. Things start to collapse. And this happens. Look there, there's Barron's again. What do you think about this one? What do you think a couple investors said? Said, where were you in 1994? So this comes out. Mobley gives him a detailed explanation of his trading strategy, and the experts who work in those markets say, it doesn't work. Said the simple volume of what you're describing doesn't happen. Says I can show you the numbers. It doesn't happen. He disputes it, of course. But here was his rules on getting your money out. This came out on the 13th. It says the 14th, but it actually came out the day before because me and the IRS agent ran to the store to get it. If you redeemed your money by the 15th of the month, you could get it by the 30th. So you had to call in your redemption by the 15th in order to get your money by the 30th. If you called it on the 16th, you had to wait till the next month, 30th or 31st. Okay? So David's people come in on that, it's a Saturday when this comes out, and they're calling everybody telling that this is a hatchet job. They're trying to stem the redemptions. But can they stem the redemptions? No. What does the FBI agent do? Does he redeem or not? No. No. He doesn't know. He doesn't redeem. He thinks that it's a hatchet job. It's not true. Look how your mind works. You don't want to admit that you've suffered a loss. That's a decision-making bias called a sunk cost, as I fall into it all the time. I buy a stock and it goes down immediately, and I'm like, all right, it's going to come back, and then it keeps going down. And eventually I sell it and get mad, but that is a common bias, and he fell into that trap. So everybody starts redeeming their money, and he can't do it. But his son gets drunk. His son's at the Alternate Trading Center in Colorado. Yes. And he gets drunk one night and calls the guy that they feel leaked this information to Barron's. And he threatens to kill him, which I know it's not going to happen, but it's an excuse for me to go into David's offices. And I don't know he's in Colorado at the time I get this. So I'm thinking search warrant. And if I want to get a search warrant, I have to describe the premises, be able to show that there are records there. And so I immediately go up to the office. And I'm like, I walk in the reception room for the first time. I hadn't seen the pictures yet. And I'm like, whoa, this is nice. And the secretary, I said, can I speak to David Mobley Jr.? So I showed her my badge and everything like that. And she's like, he's not here. Would you like to speak to David Sr.? Yes, I would. So I get escorted into his office. And he gives me this story about how this is untrue and all this other stuff. And I tell him, we have a little heart-to-heart talk. I bring out my best Baptist preacher and say, if this is the truth, you need to tell me. Right? And so I leave him with this. I said, talk to whoever you got to talk to. Talk to your wife, talk to your pastor, talk to whoever. I said, but if this is true, he says, you're going to see me again. And I know it's true. At this point, I know it's true. But I'm trying to get him to confess. So do you think he calls me? No. So I think it's the next week, I'm actually driving from Fort Myers to Sarasota because my wife's cousin's having a party. And I get a call on my cell phone. And it's somebody from the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. And they're like, this is prior to 2001. So they say, hey, we've got some people coming in on the Maricopa case. And could we use your metal detector? Because they didn't have one at the SEC. Hard to believe today, but they didn't have one. And I'm like, yeah, I can probably arrange for your guy to go through the metal detector at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Says, who have you got coming in? David Sr. I'm like, oh, really? So I immediately hang up the phone, call my boss, and said, I'm going to Washington, D.C. And I get my IRS friend. We both travel up to Washington, D.C. Next morning, we're in the SEC's offices, and we make a plan with them to basically allow them to interview him, and we won't be in the room. We give them certain parameters to make sure the confession will stay good in court, and then he confesses to them. After they're done, they come and get us, and we walk into the room, and I'm like, hey, David, how you doing? What do you think he does? He starts crying. Everybody finds Jesus when they're in trouble. And it's true. And David certainly found Jesus, and I'll tell you more about that later. Why do you think he went to the SEC instead of me?
Tried to go civil instead of criminal.
Correct. SEC has no arrest authority. SEC can only do financial penalties. And we actually found something in the search warrant that showed that he was actually looking at places over on the West Coast. We think that he was going to actually go to the West Coast and set up operation there, just like he did from Toledo. When he ran from the theft up there, nobody came after him. So what he did with the SEC is he gave him the $33 million he had in the account and said, here you go, I did it, I'm going to go away now. He meant go away to LA or something like that. And when I showed up, it was like, yeah, you're not going to go anywhere. Right? And so we grabbed him. Eventually, we search his offices. We get in there. What was interesting about that is while these guys are doing this, they're out till 2 o'clock in the morning. We're in Washington, D.C., and we're having steak dinners and just calling them and making fun of them. They paid me back, though. I got a few trash bin searches that I didn't really want. Another interesting story here is when we worked on this case, I had a good friend who worked on the 4th floor. And so I'd tell him a couple times, I'm like, hey, look out your window and see if David Mobley's there. And he'd always say, why? And I'd always tell him, like, dude, I can't tell you why. Just let me know. Very smart guy, though. He went up to the owner of the building after I started asking him a couple times. I'm like, hey, is David there? He went up to the owner of the building, and he went to the building guy, and he said, hey, if Mobley moves out of that space up on the 7th floor, we want first right at it. And the building owner, knowing nothing, says, Mobley just spent millions of dollars to decorate that space. Okay, I'll give it to you for the same rent you're paying for the 4th floor. Lo and behold, 6 months later, Him and his company are moving in the 7th floor, paying the same rent. He still thanks me for that, right? So he gets arrested. The business kind of stops. What kind of money laundering do we have here? That was a mean cat, by the way. What kind of money laundering do we have? Or do we have any? Ponzi scheme, right? So that's my SUA. My fraud is the SUA, right? We have layering and all kinds of stuff. Here's a couple of the charts we used for the indictment, all right? The very top there are the different investors that came in. The second level lists one bank account, and then on the far right is a second bank account. So there's your placement stage. The money's coming into accounts that David controls. Then it goes to a Dean Witter account under Maricopa Index Fund. Okay? Now you start to see the layering. He's moving it from the Maricopa Index hedge funds to a Dean Witter account. Then he moves it to a company called Ensign Trading, which is a company that is out of Belize, the country of Belize. When we saw this, we're like, now we got to get bank records from Belize. But guess what? The bank records for Ensign Trading were at JP Morgan in Naples. So even though the corporation was set up internationally, there was no international nexus except for the name. But it was a way to show people, say, hey, I've got my money offshore. Here's my Ensign Trading account, blah, blah, blah. It's a way to layer it. And then, of course, it goes to Stuart Title, which is where he bought the alternate trading center, right? So there you see the placement in the beginning, putting it in, you see the layering, and then finally, the last stage, the integration. That's classic money laundering. If you put these in charts, it's much easier to understand than if you try to explain it. Okay? Here's the second one. More investors on the top. Moves it to the Maricopa Fifth Third account, then to Dean Witter, and then finally he sends it to a company called Phil Driscoll Ministries. Not for sure if you know Phil Driscoll. He is a religious trumpeter, travels around the country giving concerts. From what I hear, a really nice guy. He gave a concert in Naples, and David became enamored with it. So Phil was selling CDs. David bought every single one of them. Phil told him that he wanted to spread the word of God. Phil also has a pilot's license. So he convinced David to buy him a plane. Instead of flying coach, I need a private plane. And David bought it and funded it. It's easy to do when it's not your money. Now, Phil wasn't so happy with me because we took the plane back. You know? He actually got somebody to call Attorney General John Ashcroft, who made a call down to us and say, can we give the plane back? And I was like, no. And luckily, I didn't have to fight any harder than that. We ended up seizing the plane, converting it to cash, and giving it back to the investors, right? But that's another example of the layers. Here's where he was indicted and arrested. We told you about Phil. That's where he's convicted. And then in 2001, he got sentenced to 17 and a half years in prison. So you'd think the story would end there, but it doesn't. Since it happened in 2001, right after this happened, the state of Florida was pursuing a case against the guy I showed you the picture of, and they thought David could cooperate. And we had talked to David about this case, because we were interested in federally, and David said, I don't know anything about it and some other stuff. David got a little bit smarter as he went along and realized that if he testified in certain cases, he could get his sentence reduced. And so he testified in that case. And we told the Florida prosecutors, like, hey, he's likely going to be lying to you. The Florida prosecutor didn't care, put him on trial, said he told the truth, and then went to the federal judge, asked for a reduction in sentence. We fought against it. I think they wanted 5 years. He ended up getting like 2.5 years reduced. With good time, he got out in 14 years. So he got out in 2015, I think it was. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We talk about psychopaths, right? How many of you have known a psychopath in your life, and not including your wife? They're crazy, but if you get the right kind of psychopath, they're pretty fun.
Everybody loves them.
Yes. Very charismatic. I've had the pleasure of sitting across from quite a few of them, and there is no funner interview than a psychopath. You know? In fact, you want to read a great book about psychopaths and white-collar crime. There's a book called Snakes in Suits, and it is phenomenal. No, No. Snakes and Suits is by Robert Hare and Paul Babiak, two of the leading people on psychopaths in the world. And they are just, it's fantastic. They did a study of CEOs of Fortune 500 organizations. I think they studied I forget what the numbers were, but 216 of them were full-blown psychopaths, or at least scored high on the psychopathy level. Have any of the 216 been fired? Only one, but he got a 6-figure bonus for leaving and got a job at a competitor that paid double what he was earning at the old company. Yeah. So Mobley, I don't have any scientific evidence to prove this, but I think he was a psychopath based on a couple things. You saw the picture of Courtney Hansen. Courtney's very pretty. David would send her from prison, send her roses from prison, and he'd have his blood included in there as well. We were actually afraid that he would stalk her when he got out. It became so bad because the prison guards actually called me and told me. So we reached out to Courtney and warned her when he was getting out. But the other thing he did that convinced me he was a psychopath was this. We showed his house in Quail West, Naples, in one of the nice areas. He gets out of jail, and he's got a few dollars to his name. That's it. First thing he does when he gets to Naples, he rides a bus down to Naples. He's got no family left there. His wife has divorced him, all this other stuff. He makes his way out to Quail West to that house. He knocks on the door. The lady who owns it comes to the door. Can I help you? And he's like, you're in my house. You need to get out. Yes. She's smart enough to close the door and call the police. Police come, escort David away. But think about that. You've been through this whole experience. You sat there for 15 years in jail. And now he goes to the house. Now, let me tell you this. This will shock you almost as much as the Barron's thing. Are there still people who invested with Mobley in the beginning? Are there still people who allow him to trade their money? No. No, he learned his lesson. And they got about a 33% return, 25 to 33% return on their money. So if I invested $100,000, I got $25,000, $33,000 back. That's all that was left after liquidating everything. But there are still investors today who will allow David to trade their money. Now, they put in more controls on it so David can't take it out. But I think it's just a matter of time before David finds a way and gets their money.
How is he trading their money if he's not licensed to trade?
You can buy stocks on your own. You get an E-Trade account.
He just go and set up a,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's David. These are what you're facing. And you're amazed that people still trade with him. That is classic System 1 behavior. You don't want to admit the truth. Your mind plays funny tricks on you. It's really interesting, especially when it gets to the ethics part. These people up here that you saw, Lori Welty, even the wife. And the wife, I got to tell you, the only person we charged in this was David. The wife we thought knew, we were pretty sure she knew, but then she hit us with this defense. I'm a very religious person, and I have always operated on the belief that you do what the man says because that's what the Bible says. So I may have had suspicions, but because of the Bible, I never raised a doubt. And I was gritting my teeth the whole time. Because I'm like, that's a lie, but when you get to court, I couldn't prove it. So he's the only one that went. David did a very good job of segregating the powers. He had the accounting people. The accounting people were not allowed to talk to the salespeople or the trading people. Salespeople were not allowed to talk to accounting or trading, and likewise. So he was able to segment all of this stuff and keep it away. All right, I think they just indicated my time is up. If you are interested in a business card, I have some up here. So hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you another time.